You're listening to Out of the Box with Rosie Tran. I'm here today with Lorenzo Hagerty, host of the Psychedelic Salon podcast. Lorenzo, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, great. How are you tonight, Rosie?
Good. I'm so excited to have you. For those of you who don't know, Lorenzo is a psychedelic advocate. Is that what you would call it?
Well, I don't know. I guess I see myself as a carnival barker, and I play podcasts that have talks by other people in them, and that's where all the action is. It's in the big tent, and you're in the very center ring, each and every one of you.
Well, I saw your video on your website, and so for my listeners who don't know, you have a very interesting story where you started out as kind of like a conservative guy. You know, you didn't really get into psychedelics until later in your life. And then you were just transformed by them and you became an advocate and an ecstasy dealer for a while.
Well, that too, yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to just say that, I was... 42 years old, a Vietnam veteran, a Texas lawyer, a businessman, and had never used any kind of illegal substance, although I was well into alcohol. So, I was a typical obnoxious Texas Republican at the time.
Well, some people would say, including myself, that alcohol is actually more dangerous than some of these psychedelic drugs.
Well, yeah, there's no question about that. In all of recorded history, nobody's ever died of an overdose of cannabis, which, of course, isn't technically a psychedelic. But the psychedelics there's things to be cautioned about in all substances, and psychedelics are no exception. So you have to know what you're doing and be careful. And I'm just now editing a talk by Dr. Roland Griffiths from Johns Hopkins Medical, talking about all the research they're doing. And he talks about even in the course of their research, they have to be very cautious about some of the potentially negative side effects that can take place if you don't know what you're doing and aren't in a safe environment. So I try not to necessarily be an advocate. I consider myself more of a person who likes to help others get information out about the subject and let people decide for themselves.
So you're just educating people on the pros and cons.
That was the word I was looking for, an educator.
Well, I think it's really important because a lot of kids go out there and they take a bunch of drugs and they don't really know how to do it safely.
Yeah, and that's really one of the main reasons I do these podcasts. Is see, when I got involved, that was back in I guess it was 1984 in Dallas, Texas, which was ground zero for MDMA, or at the time it was called ecstasy. And at the time, that's when I got involved there. I'd never, like I said, I was a middle-aged lawyer and Vietnam vet, and I'd never even tried pot. So, excuse me, got a little frog in my throat here. But MDMA was legal at the time, so I tried it. And things really changed once I found out that I'd been lied to my whole life about these substances. And I think that's exactly what happens when most young people smoke pot, is they say, hey, this isn't what they said it was, and maybe they're lying about everything else. Well, at the time I got involved, there really was no information available. Literally none. I, went to the Dallas Public Library and went to the bookstores, and the only thing you could find was in the occult section where it was the Casaneda's books. And so I read all those, of course, but there really wasn't anything like today. You can go to Arrowwood and get all the up-to-date information about all the latest, synthetics and everything else. So there's so much more information available now. And I think that's the key. Terence McKenna often said that if you're ever going to experiment with drugs, the experimentation begins in the library, and that should take the bulk of your time, because you should really understand what's going on with all this stuff before you jump into the pool, so to speak.
So you say that you felt you were lied to. What were some of the stereotypes or stories that you heard from the mainstream about psychedelics?
Well, you got to kind of put this in context. I'm, as you can tell by my frog in my throat, I'm an old guy. I'm 71 years old now, and so I had bought into the whole reefer madness thing that you'd go crazy on.
I've seen Reefer Madness. It's a very interesting video.
Yeah, actually, I bought a copy of it years ago as a VHS tape just to show my kids what I went through. I'm older than the baby boomers, so I went through these duck and cover drills where you're under your desk in grade school because the atomic bomb is coming, and we believed all this stuff. And then I go to Vietnam and found out I'd been really totally lied to about a lot of things, and came back and just kept my head down and tried to raise a family. And then all of a sudden this MDMA came along, and I found out that, hey, after that I tried cannabis, and I discovered that Reefer Madness was really one of the more funny shows that have been filmed during that period. It's hilarious, and it's up on YouTube now. I encourage everybody to go look at it. And when you look at it, though, today, you just can't imagine that people believe that, because it looks like such a parody and satire. But we
well,
believe
some of the
shit.
marketing at that marketing at that time is just silly too. Like they have the commercials where people are smoking cigarettes and going, it's so refreshing,
Oh yeah, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend this one over that one, and this is so, the internet is changing so much that people just can't grok it. You and I wouldn't be here without the internet right now, and your podcast is going out over the internet, and back when I was growing up, in fact, I was 12 years old before we got our first black and white TV, and the Dick Tracy two-way wrist radio was science fiction. So look where we have come in such a really short period of time. And that's the thing, all the young people who have this incredible technology at our hands. I don't consider myself young, but at your hands. But it's just amazing what levers you have to change the world finally.
I think it's a great thing, but I also think that it creates a lot of misinformation because as many websites are out there that there is some great information, I've also found a lot of websites with a lot of misinformation. So I think people still need to do their due diligence.
And see, I see that as something really good because when in the 50s, when I was coming of age, we believed everything we read in the newspapers and the magazines and everything we heard on television. And as you know now, you can't believe hardly anything you see on television or read in the newspapers, or at least you have to question it. And I think the fact that the internet has so much bad information has caused people to be much more critical of their sources. And even when you read the New York Times, you have to stop and say, I wonder where this guy got that, And so I think it's a healthy thing in the long run.
That's good. See, you grew up in the U.S., so it's a little different. My dad kind of had an opposite thing where he grew up in Vietnam where, during the war and they were smoking opium and there were opium dens and all this crazy stuff. And then he came to the U.S. and I'm sure it was so conservative to what he was used to, even though...
What part of Vietnam did he grow up in?
My dad grew up in Hanoi and my mom grew up in Saigon, and my dad fought for the South Vietnamese Army and the U.S. and doing some pretty interesting work. He was a journalist and also he did torture. Yeah, kind of scary stuff. So he's definitely a character, but he told me growing up, they had the opium dens and they had all sorts of interesting things.
Well, that one of my very closest friends in the world, he's as close to me as my biological brother, is Vietnamese, who was well, he was 8 years old when I was over there off the coast with the Navy, but I didn't know him then. But we became very close friends years later. And in 1999, he and his wife and oldest son, and my wife and I, we weren't married at the time, all went to, we flew into Saigon and then drove all the way up to the Central Highlands, up past Kon Tum to Dock Ring, which was a Montagnard leper village, and then from there went to Hue, and then my wife and I went from train on up to Hanoi from there, and so we spent like the month of June in Vietnam, and had just like the most amazing times of our lives. It was just awesome.
I saw that in your video. I think there was a picture collage, and you said making amends or making
mending my karma. Yeah,
yeah, mending your karma. So you had a really good experience going back. I mean, the country's totally different now, I'm sure, than when you went earlier.
Yeah, it's funny. I was really nervous at first and everything, and my wife said, "Hey, Lorenzo," because there were all these young guys in these communist army uniforms, everywhere, and she said, "Hey, none of them were even born when you're here. They won't recognize you." But and we were very fortunate because we went with my Vietnamese brother and his family, and so we stayed with their family in all of these various places for a few weeks, and sleeping in their homes and eating with them, and in nearby restaurants, and traveling with them, and it was just such an amazing trip that for 2 weeks we were so far into the country that we didn't even see any Westerners, and we were the only ones, so we kind of stuck out like sore thumbs. But the way that the people greeted us and were welcoming, I've never felt so welcome in my life. It was just truly a wonderful experience for me.
Well, it sounds like your karma has been mended.
Oh yes, it has. It has. And
I'm jealous. I'm Vietnamese and I haven't been back yet, so I'm very jealous.
Well, yeah, every Tet, my brother says, "Hey, you got to come back with me." He went last year, I think. So maybe not this Tet, but the one after, I may go back with him for that. That would be a wonderful month to spend over there.
That's really awesome. So I wanted to talk about also. You mentioned in one of your videos that you feel that some psychedelics have a healing quality to them, and I think I agree with this, and I think that. What you were discussing about people lowering their inhibitions and being able to be honest with each other is something that's really unique and interesting.
Yeah, that in particular, and I guess probably when you talk about healing, the one that would come up, one of the first is, while it's not truly a psychedelic, and that's MDMA or ecstasy, but pure MDMA, and it's I think a lot of psychologists now call it an empathogen, because the empathy building up between 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 people that are doing it in a quiet setting, the empathy and the you're no longer afraid of being really honest. And it's like my granddaughter the other day said, "Hey, Baba, you should brush your teeth. Your breath smells bad." Well, that's we've all had that experience with adults as adults, but we don't say it. But that's the kind of honesty, your breath smells bad honesty, to where you can say something to somebody knowing that they're in the same state with you, and you can really get some truthful dialogue going. And I've never done it in company with a trained therapist, like is being done by the Mithoffers and Charlie Grobe and people like that. But with a trained therapist, I just can't imagine how much how wonderful work they can do, because your barriers are down, and you trust the people that you're with. And from what I understand from the work the Mithoffers are doing, of course, they don't take the substance with their participants, only the participants, and yet they still achieve that high level of trust with their therapists that isn't there without previously years and years of working together.
I've experienced some psychedelics. I haven't done everything. And I had a very positive experience with MDMA, but I also had a negative experience where I had called up a girlfriend and she was very, very depressed. She didn't know I was on MDMA. And when I spoke to her, I then became really, really depressed. Do you know what that has to do with?
Well, no, I'm not qualified to know, other than the fact that it's some sort of a transference, and that's why we preach so much about set and setting. You have control of the set of your mind and the setting that you're in. And one of the absolute rules that I've always enforced with myself on psychedelics is to unplug the phone and never talk to anyone on the phone. So you've reinforced in my mind the reason I have that rule.
Yeah, that was the only bad trip I've ever had. And
Yeah, I was just going to say that whenever you have an experience, if it's with somebody that's pretty significant with you and all, those are really amazing. If you have it with by yourself and have a sitter, the best thing to do is have the sitter, a few doors down, and then you ring a bell if you're in distress, and the sitter can come and say, hey, it's okay, you took a drug, you'll be okay in 2 hours, you'll be back to normal, and goes away. Because if somebody else is in the room with you, even, that's the third party, and so you start to behave a little differently, and you can get more out of some of these things totally alone, or with somebody or a small group of people who are really close friends. Also, and I won't put down on this at all, you can get a lot out of it dancing all night with a group of about 10,000 people. It's pretty amazing. But the difficulty is so many people learn about it on dancing and never really explore its true power in a therapy situation. And hopefully with the work that the mid-offers and MAPS and some of these other organizations are doing, it'll at least get approved in the next 10 years or so for therapeutic use. And then, in particular, my hot button is PTSD from all of these guys returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I know there's going to be some studies very soon of veterans with PTSD and MDMA. And once those studies get underway, I think we'll get it approved quickly, at least for the military, which is a real serious problem right now.
I totally agree with you. I actually went over to Iraq and Kuwait for a comedy tour, and I met so many soldiers. Some soldiers told me who were in obvious distress, Lorenzo, obviously had PTSD, obviously had issues, and the type of treatment that they received just seemed really subpar from what they were telling me.
First of all, I want to thank you, Rosie, for going over and doing that. I did hear you talk about that in a previous podcast, and I really applaud you for doing that. That means a lot to those guys. And yeah, there's really not been any effective treatment for PTSD right now. There's all kinds of suppressant medications that the side effects you turn into zombies and stuff. And so what the Mithoffers have proven with I forget what they call it. It's a deep state of PTSD where you really don't leave the house or anything. And they were working with a relatively small population of women rape victims, some who hadn't left the house in years and all, and had just awesome results to the level as such that the Pentagon has approved their population for further studies. So, and this is something that what they did with these women who recovered is they only had 1 or 2 treatments with MDMA and then several follow-up treatments. But over a year later, these women are in remission or cured. I don't think you're ever cured probably, but at least they're functional and they're holding down jobs now and they're out of the house and they're significantly improved, and they're not taking something every single day. They don't take anything for it because of this treatment. And so I've seen this happen just, with military veterans that, a bunch of us have kind of done this ourselves. And when I was living in Florida, I saw a number of cases where that happened. And veterans that were, kind of into the rave movement and rave scene and found MDMA were helping each other out. And it was working pretty good. So I am very hopefully optimistic that at least before another decade is out, there will be a lot of treatment centers for PTSD that will have some very good results.
Why do you think this information hasn't been more mainstream? Do you think it's big pharmaceuticals, or why do you think they're suppressing this amazing drugs.
Well, the patent, it was patented back in the early 20th century, and so the patent ran out. And not only can you not patent it, also it only takes one or two treatments, and so it's just not a moneymaker. And so the pharmaceutical industry has no advantage in talking about this thing. And it was being used by therapists on the West Coast for many years until it hit the street and then became a social problem. That was it was kind of a social problem because nobody knew what to do with it. It became kind of a wild deal. There were kids standing on the steps of the state capitol building in Texas with white T-shirts on with big black X's, selling ecstasy to people walking in at the state capitol.
When was this?
That was in the late 80s. Let's see. No, it's in mid 80s, around 84, 85. Not long after I got involved in it all. It was just crazy. I might even still have some of those old newspaper clippings, but it was pretty amazing back then because it was, it's legal. I was a lawyer. I wasn't about to touch that stuff if it wasn't legal because, they're putting people in jail for 30 years for one joint in Texas. It was really tough on drugs. And here comes something that was just like a miracle drug. So we all became evangelists about the whole thing.
So what made you decide to try it if you were so conservative and, not even smoking pot or whatever? What made you decide to all of a sudden try this drug?
That's a really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before, Rosie. Well, it was sort of maybe like a perfect storm and I'll have to give a little thought to this because I've never really given it really much thought, but it's a good question. I was 42 years old and kind of approaching a midlife crisis. I'd had a computer company that had been really great, but IBM had just come in and starting to give us all kinds of problems. And I was starting to have a little problem in my marriage. All these things were going on. And then this friend of mine says, hey, you ought to check out ecstasy. And so the person I made contact with was, a flashy person, a friend of my wife's, my ex-wife now, but who was in the fast crowd there, and she took me to the Start Club, and I thought, oh my God, am I living a boring life? It's time to change. And so it was a perfect storm. I was just ready for something for a change, but I had no idea what kind of a change was going to take place.
Do you feel that ecstasy has made you more, or doing MDMA and other psychedelics has made you more spiritual or open to an alternative idea of the universe?
Oh, for sure. And in many ways, they just kind of took me back to very early childhood before you get the nuns and priests trying to put ideas in your head, and just to kind of yourself when you were daydreaming about who you were and what the world was. And, but, I went through a period in Florida where I was really in depression and all. There were no psychedelics around for a long time, and I divorced, and so I just thought I was going to be an atheist. And I tried really hard to be an atheist all week long, but this friend I was working with had a farm on the edge of town, and he'd bring in these bags of mushrooms to me because the cows would lay cow patties, the mushrooms were growing. So I'd be an atheist during the week, and then on Friday and Saturday I'd drink this mushroom tea, and just can't be an atheist when you're tripping on mushrooms. So that's when I became what I would consider more of a spiritual person, and I've actually done a lot of reading and studying about the origin of religions and spiritual lives and things like that. So I think that they're just catalysts for the imagination. They take down barriers so that you free yourself up to think new thoughts without being within the boundaries of what other people might think of your new thought.
Well, I'm kind of in the same place that you were when you were in your 40s. I've been a pretty good girl and been almost straight edge. I've done a couple things here and there, some mushrooms and some pot cookies, but I don't drink and I don't really do anything. And I'm I, I'm kind of like maybe I need to explore more stuff.
Well, it's interesting. I'm in the middle of editing this talk by Roland Griffiths, as I said, and some of the real big research project that is now starting to get underway is about the intersection of psychedelics and meditation. And they did a study with new meditators, and now they're doing a study with people who've had a long-term deep meditation practice but have never used psychedelics. And then they're putting them doing MRIs while they're doing meditation and psychedelics, something like that. I'm messing this whole thing up, and he'd be horrified if he heard me describe it that way. But in any event, in hearing the way he was describing the end state of some of the deep meditation practices is very, very, very similar to the deep state of psychedelics. Now, my dear departed friend Myron Stolaroff, who was one of the real pioneers of the 50s in psychedelic research, he was also, the greatest meditator I knew. He meditated for an hour and a half every morning and would go to meditation retreats for several weeks every year, and yet was one of the leading LSD researchers in the 50s, and continued to use LSD. He and I have shared some experiences, and he would be the first to attest that even in the deepest meditative states he's achieved, it was nothing like the psychedelic state in LSD, and yet he felt that you could, I shouldn't say nothing like, but it wasn't to the deep extent he didn't feel, but he was trying for that. And he spent his whole life trying to reach in meditation the states he'd reached in psychedelics, and he said he touched the boundaries of it. So at least my belief is, or my understanding is, that it's possible. And so maybe step one is a deep meditation practice.
I do meditation, and I do yoga and other things like that. But I have a question before I continue. So what do you say to people? Because I know that you reference a lot of science, which I really appreciate. And I know that a lot of people kind of dismiss this stuff as kind of hippie stuff, or it's not real, or it's just have you heard people being dismissive of it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I get that from my friends and family. But again,
but there's real science behind all of this, and that's what I don't like, when people kind of dismiss it as a pseudoscience, or this isn't real, because there's a lot of spirituality that kind of is associated with that type of thinking that people dismiss, and there's science behind it. I mean, there's scientific proof that there's a human soul. I don't know if you believe this, but I mean, Nikola Tesla measured the electromagnetic fields around people's bodies, which he thought was an aura. And a lot of people dismiss this stuff and say, oh, well, you guys are just a bunch of hippies, or you're on drugs or whatever. But there's a real science, right?
Well, I got to see this at first hand, because the the study that was done at Harbor UCLA Medical School regarding giving psilocybin to end-stage cancer patients. My wife was actually the research assistant for Dr. Grobe in that study, so I saw the immense amount of detail that goes into a study like this, and all of the various questionnaires that go on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, 6 months follow-up. And then when you listen to this next podcast I have that Dr. Griffiths is talking about what's going on at Johns Hopkins and he names over a dozen of the top researchers involved in all these various projects going on. And then over in Zurich, Vollenweiler is doing all kinds of research for maps, and in Israel. And there is a lot of scientific research going on, but the U.S. press doesn't talk about it. There were several thousand papers published on the benefits of medical marijuana last year around the world, but we don't hear about that. So why
do you think the mainstream media is so dismissive?
Well, who owns the mainstream media? There's only five corporations control 90% of all the print media. Print, television, and radio media are controlled ultimately by five mega corporations. So, there's five CEOs that determine what news is allowed to reach the masses. And that's why the internet is so important, is that it's disintermediating all of the mainstream media. And podcasts like yours, you're reaching people that wouldn't be getting this information other ways, because we're all kind of dropping out of the media world, the mainstream world, because you can't trust it.
There is a lot of spin and silly stuff that's focused on in the mainstream, which I don't like, some of the celebrity gossip and some of the nonsense, when there's a lot of real issues going on around the country and around the world that aren't being covered, yet they're focusing on, some reality star's date or whatever.
Yeah, and what's really also being missed to a large extent, I think, is the local news. There's so much good stuff going on locally all over the country. In Madison, Wisconsin, the people who were first involved in Occupy Madison, they have come together and kept working together. They're building an eco village, and they finally just completed the first house in the eco village that they're giving to homeless people. Now, these are the kind of things that, it's happening on community levels, and there's community gardens everywhere now popping up, and time banks, and all kinds of interesting things that are happening. So I think that by finding out what's going on locally, people maybe maybe getting involved in some of these things. There's a lot more hope to be had than just reading about the stock market, which none of us have any control over. Or I don't have any money in any house. What do I care?
I have heard about some of the time banks. So for those of you listeners who don't know, a time bank is like a bank without money. You can donate your time and then you can cash out time. Have you ever participated in a time bank, Lorenzo?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my wife is really active in a time bank where, like, she's getting hours for some volunteer work that she's doing in a vitamin D study here in town, and for some other work with the recycling center. And so she gets hours put in there for the time bank, and then our family doctor accepts time bank hours. So recently we went to get our medical marijuana, recommendations renewed, and we paid in time bank hours, and the doctor accepts time bank. Well, what that is an hour for an hour. Like, I can help somebody with how to build a website, or you can babysit, or you can drive some old person to the doctor, or you can perform brain surgery. The theory is that a human hour is worth a human hour, the same to everybody. So there's no financial gain on it, and the IRS has actually approved these time bank transactions as being tax free. So
that is wonderful.
Yeah, and it's really an amazing thing. They're popping up all over the country, and there's a website about it that has free software you can use to get started. And there's one in Madison, Wisconsin, with like over 1,000 people in it. So that's just one form of new currency that's going on, new ways that people are using to keep from feeding the war machine here in the U.S. And doing it, by the way, legally within the framework of the IRS, which is very important.
What is the name of the time bank that you use?
I think it's just timebank.org, something like that. But there should be a bunch of stuff on time banks, and just search on time bank and your location, your city, or something. I almost said Google it, but I've quit saying Google things. I use DuckDuckGo, so I've started saying duck it, but nobody understands what I'm saying when I say duck it. They think I'm saying something else.
Is there a reason you prefer that over Google?
Oh, yeah. Let me count the ways. I recommend you avoid all things Google. I won't go into all that, but
no, tell.
Okay, DuckDuckGo doesn't keep track of any of your searches or anything like that. Yeah, I just published a link to a story called the Psychological Dark Side of Gmail. 'Cause, see, what happens is every email that you send via Gmail, whether it's if you have a Gmail account or if you answer somebody with a Gmail account, that a copy of that is going in that person's file, in their folder. So, and every text they send, every like they give on Google Plus, every link that they click on a Google search, and where they've come from on that link, and how long they spend on that link, all that goes in your file. They already have an incredibly deep file on it. And as Eric Schmidt, the past CEO, says, we know where you are, we know where you've been, and we pretty much know what you're thinking. That's Google. So
That's kind of creepy.
it is extremely creepy. I no longer will respond to people with Gmail addresses. I think I responded to you when we were setting this up, and it's one of the few I've responded to. I usually send out kind of a nasty little link to that that article.
I didn't send you a Gmail, did I?
No, I don't know. It was somebody did just recently, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I should send this nasty link. It was for it was another podcast just the other day. I talked to somebody in Texas or in Chicago, but I can't be totally a grumpy old man all the time, you know.
So what is a good, like, if someone, so I've done a couple things. I've done MDMA, I've done mushrooms, I have had pot cookies. I can't smoke because I have allergy to smoke, and I get really sick and turn red and get hives. But oh, there's my puppy. What is a good kind of easy psychedelic to try that's not too intense for someone that's like a beginner?
Well, you know, the very safest thing is always the thing that humans been using the longest and the most natural, and that would be mushrooms. You know, low dose, a real low dose of mushrooms probably would be one of the easier ways to ease in. You know, a little mushroom tea or something like that. But
what's like what is the highest, most intense psychedelic, and not in dosage, just in general?
That would be DMT, without a doubt, DMT. And do you know where your closest source of DMT is?
Where?
It's in your own brain.
Oh, I should have guessed.
Somehow, and for some reason, is yet to be discovered, humans have endogenous DMT in their brains. Speculation is it could be released for when you're born and when you die, and that's the white light thing or something. But nobody really knows yet what it is, what it's all about. But DMT, there's two main ways of taking it. Three, I guess, but two main ones, and one is to smoke it, and the other is it's a component in ayahuasca, because see, DMT, if you swallow it, your gut neutralizes it, and so you have to have something to inhibit the monoamine oxidase. And so ayahuasca, the vine, is the inhibitor, and then they put chacruna in it, which has DMT. So the ayahuasca drink is really a combination. It's a polydrug, if you will, and it neutralizes the MAO in your gut. And so the DMT, when it's smoked, is incredibly intense and lasts 6 to 12 minutes. When it goes in your gut, through the ayahuasca experience, it's well, parts of it are equally intense, but it lasts 4 to 6 hours. So it's but it doesn't last 4 to 6 hours at that awesome intensity of smoking it. But it is without a doubt the the most psychedelic thing that I've ever experienced.
So what causes, I have friends that have done ayahuasca and they were puking and vomiting. What is causing all that vomiting? Is it because of something reacting with the stomach, or?
Well, in the tradition that I've practiced in, it's called La Purga, and it's purging up psychic crap, you know, all the garbage in your life. It's more of a psychological purging that causes this than biological. And this is, you know, I'm repeating stuff that I've been told. I've been on, you know, when I've taken ayahuasca, you fast for like 6 or 8 hours ahead of time, only little water, And I've done fast for 12 hours ahead of time, only a few sips of water, and I've purged an amazing amount of black crud. One time it was when I was having an experience saying I wanted to get rid of my fear, and it just purged all my fear. But I've had a lot of experiences where I didn't purge at all, and it's really more of a psychological purging of some kind of crap you've been holding back in your mind. And you'll be sitting there and all night long for hours, and other people, you can hear them barfing into their buckets, and you're just listening to the music and everything's fine. And all of a sudden you have this little voice in the back of your head that says, grab your bucket, I need to talk to you. And then you have you barf a little bit, and sounds really gross. I can't, it doesn't sound gross to me anymore, I have to admit, because I've been through it so much. But when I was so afraid of all the barfing, and I hated barfing and everything. And so for the first 5-6 times I used ayahuasca, I did not purge. And then finally I did. And, it's amazing. It's like being, those great 4th of July fireworks at the climax when they all bum, 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 and all the orange. You're right in the middle of it. It's in your head. And, well, it's a wonderful experience. And so when you don't purge anymore, you start feeling like you were cheated. So, it's very strange. It's like having a dream. You have to be there.
So for those of you listening who don't know what ayahuasca is, it's a plant, right?
Ayahuasca.
And it's brewed into a tea drink.
But when people talk about drinking ayahuasca, they're talking about an ayahuasca brew that is that vine plus another plant. That vine carries harmine and harmaline, which is a MAO inhibitor. And the actual active psychedelic, the major active psychedelic ingredient is DMT, which comes from chacruna. I can't remember the other name for the plant, but it's kind of leaves of a tree. So it's a vine and a tree leaves that are combined, and they boil together all day and make this real thick. It's like really thick pea soup that is so grossly bitter I can hardly talk about it right now. And you have to almost gag it down. And it's like I say, it's thick, so you got to just kind of force it down. And then you sit there for 40 minutes or so before it starts to come on. And your whole project there is to keep it down, because it does kind of upset your stomach a little bit. Right? But your stomach, of course, is empty by then and all. And then all of a sudden, it just starts coming on gangbusters, and forget about everything else for a while.
Is there what is the street name for DMT? Is there a street name?
No, I think it's just DMT. Well, there's two kinds of DMT too. So when you just say DMT, you're talking about NN-DMT, and there's another called 5-MeO DMT. So NN-DMT just goes by DMT, and 5-MeO DMT is usually called 5-MeO. And until recently, 5-MeO was available on the internet. Recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they made it illegal on the net. But there are two totally different experiences. One's called the power, and the other's called the glory. I think DMT is the power and 5-MeO the glory, but I could be wrong. I got a 50-50 chance on that one. But DMT is just unbelievably visual. The visuals are just stunning and fast, and a lot of stuff happening in a short period of time. That's the one that Terence McKenna talks about. Self-dribbling jeweled basketballs and machine elves and things like that. Well, if those words really are a disservice, because it took me years, because I never saw those things he was talking about. It took me years to realize that what I was seeing could be described the way he was, but I would describe it differently. So that's one of the problems of these experiences. You can't really describe them too well. But the 5-MeO DMT, is more like you're broken into a jillion little infinitesimal photons and you feel the whole cosmos. It's a pretty cosmic experience. But one of the things I should point out in all of these experiences, and I've had a number of them, is I've never lost the sense of being me. They talk about ego loss, and I've done large doses of LSD, and ego loss is a strange term because I used to think it meant a loss of me being me, but I have never lost the sense of me in any of these experiences. I've not been able to bring back and explain some things, and that's very common among everybody. Shulgin has 5 levels of experience, and on the +5 is where everything is as it should be. Everything is perfect. There's nothing to worry about. And then when you come back down, you cannot explain a word of it other than to say, boy, I think it's all right.
What are the dangers? Are there any dangers of, obviously, if people are doing too much, if someone is in a safe space in their home and they do a moderate dosage, is there any major danger?
Well, yeah, there are dangers. The number one danger, of course, is the law. It's illegal. And so you have to be very cautious about what you're doing. Number 2 danger is your purity, the source. Since it's not legal, then it's not regulated. If it was legal, it would be regulated, and you would at least know something about the qualifications of the laboratory that made it, the purity of your substance. And so unless you know really a lot about the source and can trust that, you're really taking a big chance. So those are 2 big provisos there. Now, as far as
what about mixing? People should just do one at a time, not mixing different, right?
For sure. Until you've tried each one separately, you shouldn't mix them. You should never polydrug with 2 drugs that you've not tried individually before. And here's the best advice about all this stuff and safety and all, is go to Arrowwood, EROWID, Arrowwood.org, and it's the largest drug database on the web. It's run by some friends of mine. It's been there for a long, long time. They're getting 100,000 hits a day or visitors a day. Even law enforcement uses them because they're the most accurate information about all of these substances. And you go in and you enter in the name or the chemical identification of whatever the substance is, and then you go there and there's so much information about dosage, setting. But they also have trip reports, and these things have been really screened. I mean, they don't just post these things. They're probably about 5 years behind in posting them. There's so backlog, but these are well screened. And so my advice is you get the information, and then you go to the trip reports and read about the bad trips, because anybody can handle a good trip, but read about the problems people have had and the bad trips. And then if you think, I couldn't handle that, well, then move on, find something else, or go back to cannabis. But you do have to be careful, and I'm just now learning in this talk that I'm editing. One of the things they screen for at the Johns Hopkins studies is they do screen to see if people might be prone, particularly young people, 25 and under, might be prone to have a family history of mental illness of some kind. Not that is a predictor, but they just don't want to take any chances in their study. And so some of the advice that he gives there about what they're looking for to be careful about would be well served for people to listen to themselves to see if they fall into one of those categories. Because all of these substances, by the way, are so really different. The experiences are so different. I've never really found anybody who is equally favorable with all of them. We all kind of end up with a few favorites of our own, and they don't often match with our friends. And so it's not like somebody should go out and try to be king of the hill and do all these things heroically. You find an ally that works for you, whether it's meditation or cannabis or mushrooms or whatever. I think the answer is out there, and there's so many things in nature that are just available in in every county park. So it's you learn your substances, and these things seem to find you when you're ready for them. And so start learning about plants, growing plants. Salvia is a good thing to grow in the window box. It's something that's never been an ally of mine. But
what is that? What does salvia do?
Well, Salvia divinorum is. I'm one of the people that doesn't seem to have the right receptors for salvia, but Daniel Siebert is the one who is probably the world's expert on it, and he and I have talked about it quite a bit. It's salvia may be almost as potent as DMT in many respects. It's I've heard, I think maybe some of the most astounding stories I've heard on psychedelics, now that I think of it, have been salvia stories, and it's amazing the continuity from people who are telling these stories that took it years apart, and how similar the stories are. So Salvia divinorum, and up until a few years ago, it was legal throughout the United States, and it's basically a houseplant. It'll grow on your windowsill, and I think you can find it all over the place. Just Salvia divinorum. I've got a podcast I did a long time with Daniel on it, and he's got a website too. So there's a lot of information about that.
Okay. Well, we have gotten a lot of interesting information.
and just keep in mind, I'm a carnival barker. I'm not an expert on anything. They say an expert is a former drip that was under pressure. So I don't want to be one of those. But there's so much information out at Arrowwood and in not just my podcast about, if you're interested in cannabis, the Dope Fiend, who is no longer doing a podcast, but he did 8 years of podcasts, and now that he's turned 30, he's retired. But he gave some of the best information. He was in UK out of London, I think. Gave some of the best information about cannabis around. So all of his 300 plus shows are still available, and there's just a lot of good information out there now. So people need to educate themselves before they start swallowing things they don't know what they are. I think you're like I did. Sorry.
Well, I think you're right about things affecting everyone differently, because I can do cannabis edibles and have no issue, and I have a friend that does them, and he just gets paranoid and crazy and can't handle them. Yet when he smokes cannabis, he's totally fine.
Well, interesting story about cannabis and edibles is that Anne and Sasha Shulgin, and for your audience that don't know, Sasha Shulgin is the chemist that reintroduced MDMA and has introduced all of these, I call them ABCs, the 2CBs, 2CT2s, 2CT7, 2CBs, all of these new exotic chemicals. And Sasha has spent his whole lifetime developing these and is the world's foremost psychedelic chemist probably ever. He's in his 80s now and is unfortunately suffering dementia. But Sasha and his wife Anne, who is a therapist, neither of them ever liked cannabis. And they just said, no, sorry, we can't stand it. It doesn't do any good for us. It upsets us. And neither of them ever liked it. Well, I came across this lecture they were giving, one question and answer session. I podcasted it when I heard them talking about, Sasha was talking about this time said, remember that time we were on something? We were actually able to stop the second hand on the clock just by thinking about it. And why did we let it go again? And she said, well, because you chickened out, and everybody laughed. And he said, well, what were we on at that time? What was that stuff? And she says, it was pot brownies. So here's one of the world's leading psychedelic chemists who doesn't like cannabis that had a real psychedelic experience on cannabis brownies.
Yeah, I just think everything affects everyone differently. And I think you're right, that the research is important. And
the thing to add to that, what you just said that's so important, is since it does affect everyone differently, always start on the low end of the recommended dose. You never know where you are.
Yeah, and I always advocate that. Anytime, like I said, I'm a lightweight. I don't even drink alcohol. I don't smoke cigarettes, and I rarely do anything. But the times that I have done stuff, I always do it in a safe space at my house with friends that I like and trust, and very low dosage. And I just can't understand when people have never tried something and they do it at a nightclub and pop 5 pills. It's like, no, that's not smart.
Yeah, you're right. You know, you and I are in this for the long haul, Rosie, and let's hope let's get a lot.
We're in it for the long haul drug usage.
That's right. You know, I'm 71. I'm planning at least another 20 years of this ride. So you got to pace yourself. You know.
That's right. I had a couple girlfriends who did some wild drug use in their day, and they ended up in some really bad situations. So I think it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the long haul is, you know, you don't want to work yourself out of some bad situations. And I've seen, you know, I've had friends that have died, you know, mainly through using these substances in water. You never get in a swimming pool or a hot tub if you're high. It's just so simple, and yet, you know, experienced people still do it, and they die every year.
I have never heard of that. Can you explain really quick before we wrap up?
Well, yeah, it's just like one guy, he was smoking DMT in the bathtub, and just kind of just lost all feeling and just drowned.
Okay.
Yeah. Another one was smoking 5-MeO in a jacuzzi, and you know, just sort of blissed out and drowned. You know, that's
just losing touch with consciousness because of the drug use.
Yeah, and so you don't want to be where you're going to slip underwater. You know, just water and psychedelics are like water and oil; they really don't mix.
Got it.
But it's so comfortable. You know, that's why people want.
Maybe a water bed.
That's one thing I have never done. I've never gotten into a pool or any water tub or anything with psychedelics, because I just, you know, people that were so much more experienced than me didn't survive it. It's just a risk not worth taking.
Yes, that's probably wise. What about laying on a water bed and just having the experience of water?
Well, that's pretty good. I've done that. Nothing wrong with that.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Guys, please subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher, and go to outoftheboxpodcast.com and click on the donate button. We really need your donations to keep the podcast going. Thanks for listening.